So we will be picking up in First Corinthians. Oh my word, Genesis chapter 31 in about verse 16. So we'll do a quick review. It's been 2 weeks, so I won't give you a quiz, but we covered the middle of chapter 30 till the first section of 31, and in the midst of that, we talked about Jacob, and he and Laban reached an agreement about Jacob's wages. And because Laban didn't want to lose Jacob's work and slavery, if you will, but also because he recognized God has blessed him. And Jacob got to choose his own wages. He chose the spotted and speckled and colored goats and lambs. Laban thinks he's got a good deal because these are a small percentage. Jacob then he says, I'm going to make sure this happens. I'm going to send you 3 days away. You can't interact with my flocks, but you still have to take care of them. But then God intervenes and allows Jacob's flocks to increase and Laban's flocks to decrease. And the fact that Jacob did some things without scientific evidence or scientific fact, but God, the statement that I came across and shared with you is God condescended to Jacob's deceptive efforts and his superstitious beliefs and blessed him because that is what he promised to do. At the end, we saw that Laban and his sons are angry with Jacob, really angry with God because Jacob didn't really do anything. God blessed him, and they recognize that the relationship is broken, and Jacob and his family get ready to leave, and that's where we pick up in chapter 31 and verse 17. So he's prepared his family. He's told them to get ready, and his wives are in agreement. And then verse 17, then Jacob rose and set his sons and his wives on camels. He carried away all his livestock and all his possessions which he had gained, and his acquired livestock which he had gained in Padan-Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. So he gets together all his flocks and everybody, his family, and he starts, remember, he's 3 days away from Laban, and he starts to go home to Canaan to his father. It says, verse 19, now Laban had gone to shear sheep, and Rachel had stolen the household idols that were her father's. So this is kind of backing up. They've already left, but then the author or the narrator is giving us information of what Rachel had done. So what had Rachel done to her father? Stolen his idols. So what do we learn about Laban in terms of his religion or his God? Yeah, he included idols. Yeah, we don't know whether he simply worshipped idols only or whether he worshipped the idols and the one true God and trying to mix them together as Israelites had a penchant for doing. Why would Rachel steal the idols? Okay, so they might be Rachel's gods as well. That's not clear at this point. What other possibilities are that motivated her to steal these idols? Okay, there's some value. They probably would be overlaid or solid metal or even precious metals, maybe even have jewels. So she's looking for value or for riches. Right? Vengeance. Why would you say vengeance, Althea? Yeah, I think that plays into it. We don't know all the rest of it, but they rightfully felt slighted. And as we go through this passage, I don't know if we'll get to the end of the chapter today, but we get a picture of how Laban views his family and what little value he places on them. So he was not a great leader of his family and not a great father, and she might be trying to get even, saying, if you want to treat me like a piece of property, then I'm going to get even. And there could be lots of other reasons. Those are some of the ones I thought of as well. Verse 20, Jacob stole away unknown to Laban the Syrian, that he did not tell him that he intended to flee. Why would Jacob sneak away instead of just telling his father-in-law, look, I'm leaving? Yeah, he got tricked for the, he got to stay and work off 2 wives, so maybe he's afraid something else is going to come up. Any other reasons you can think of maybe that he stole away? It's interesting that the author uses the word stole in the middle of this, but okay. So they don't have to say no to Laban and trying to resist his offer or his manipulation. How has Laban viewed his daughters at this point? What does he think of them from our last couple of chapters in his life? Didn't think much of them. And we're going to find out, I don't know if we'll get to it, like I said, it's right at the end of the chapter, but he still views them as his. That's the issue. They belong to him. They don't belong to Jacob. They're not his wives. They're my daughters. So I think that's another reason that Jacob chooses to do this, because he knows how Laban views his daughters, that they're his. They're not really Jacob's wives. So he fled, verse 21, with all that he had, and he arose and crossed the river and headed toward the mountains of Gilead. So Jacob's way up top there in the little circle. And so it's going to tell us in a minute that he crossed the Euphrates, but he's also heading this direction. So we don't know how far he really got in terms of distance. It's going to talk about how many days travel it took, but in terms of distance, so he at least crosses the Euphrates. And we're going to find out in a minute. So he gets that far away from Laban. Verse 22, and Laban was told on the 3rd day that Jacob fled. So if he was 3 days away from Jacob, it took someone that long to get back to him and tell him, hey, Jacob took off. Then he took his brethren with him, pursued him for 7 days' journey, and he overtook them in the mountains of Gilead. How does the author describe Laban's approach when he hears about Jacob leaving? Okay, come on, we want to go get him. If this was a Western, what would this be? A posse, yeah. It's not. This is not a family thing. This is like we're going to pursue them and bring them back. That's the idea. We're going to put them on the back of the horse and drag them back. But you can see again why Jacob did what he did, because Laban's attitude about all of this. So he pursued them and overtook them in the mountains of Gilead. So this is a mountain, not the mountain. We don't know exactly where this happened, but you can see the area where he overtakes them. And we're going to find out in a minute that Jacob is up on top of the mountain, and then Laban arrives there in the evening, overtook him, and so nothing really happens. But here in verse 24, but God had come to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night, and said to him, be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. What happens to Jacob, or to Laban, when he catches up to Jacob? He has a dream. So he's pursuing him hot and heavy for 10 days, or he's left for 10 days. They've been pursuing him for a week. And he gets there, and God shows up in a dream. And what does God say to him? Be careful. Yeah, New King James is an interesting translation in that he says, be careful. This is very close to trying to translate the original language literally. Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. So what is if you have another translation, what does that say? And then if not, let's talk about what God is communicating to Laban. Take heed, okay? Pay attention, good. What is he supposed to pay attention to? Or what is he supposed to be careful about? How he speaks to him. And what does God say about speaking, or how he should or shouldn't speak to him? Vicky said he shouldn't say anything, which would probably be a good thing for Laban and for Jacob. But so here's what God, I think, is communicating to the best of my understanding of this phrase. The matter is settled by God. So don't do anything to Jacob. Okay? Your only option is to simply accept this is what God has planned. Now, what do you think prompted God to speak to Laban and warn him about this? Well, yeah, Barb says he's prepared for all-out war. Yeah, Laban wasn't coming to have a family reunion and then send them on their way. If that was his intent, God would never have stepped in and said, look, you be careful, watch what you're doing. He had the intent of capturing and bringing back his children. Whether or not Jacob would come back in one piece, I don't know. But he wanted Jacob back, or his daughters back, his grandchildren back, and the flocks and herds that he felt were his. And God steps in and says, look, this is my doing. Watch yourself. Be careful what you do, because this is my plan and this is what I want to happen. Knowing what you know about Laban, what do you think he's going to, before you read anymore, what do you think he's going to do? You think he's going to, is that sarcasm back there? Okay. I couldn't tell. See, my wife sarcastically said, of course he's going to heed the advice of God. He's going to look for the loophole. How can I manipulate? How can I deceive? How can I get what I want? So let's see what he does. That's my opinion too. That's what I would expect Laban to do. Verse 26, and Laban said to Jacob, what have you done that you have stolen away unknown to me and carried away my daughters like captives taken with the sword? What's the first words out of Laban's mouth? What have you done? And what does he accuse Jacob of doing? Stealing what? His daughters. Who were these women? Jacob's wives. I think they belong to Jacob. If I take my wife somewhere and she's willing to go, that's not stealing. And what does he say? Not only that you've taken away my daughters like captives with the sword. Either he is full of himself or he really believes that his girls didn't ever want to leave Dad. And what do we know about these young ladies? How do they feel about Dad? They're not happy. In fact, one of them stole from him because she felt like she was owed. But he is looking at them as, you have taken away my property by force. Even though we know from the narrator and from the account that these women recognized what their father thought of them and said, you know what, there's nothing left for us here. Let's go with our husband. Verse 27, why did you flee secretly and steal away from me and not tell me? For I might have sent you away with joy and songs, with timbrel and harp. All right, so how does that relate to what he just said? Barb says he's trying to gloss it over. After what he just said, do you think he would have thrown a farewell party and, helped them pack the camel? Might, yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's a good observation. And Barb says, for I might. Not that I would. We don't believe he even might, but we definitely believe he never would. He's trying to pass off this anger, this frustration about what Jacob has done as, well, I didn't get a chance to say goodbye to my girls and my grandsons and granddaughters. rather than you took something that I think is mine, and there's no way they would have ever be willing to go with you. Then he goes on, and you did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Now you have done foolishly in so doing. How does he describe the people of Jacob's household? They're his. My sons, they're not his sons, they're Jacob's sons. If he would have said my grandsons, that would have been a little different. But then he also, my daughters. Yes, they're his daughters, but they're also Jacob's wives. And he says, you did not allow me to kiss them goodbye. And you've done foolishly. Verse 29, it is in my power to do you harm. So what is that? That's a threat. Now, what do we know that Jacob doesn't know? The dream. If he were to act on this threat, what has God already told him, basically? Don't do it. There will be consequences. I am involved. This is my plan, and if you're going to try and prevent my plan, then you're going to have to deal with me. But even so, he gets us all out. And then what does he say? But the God of your fathers spoke to me last night, saying, be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. The only thing that's preventing Laban from doing what he wants to Jacob, his daughters, and his grandchildren is what? God stepped in. God stepped in and said, don't do it. And amazingly, this man listened. I'm not sure that Jacob or Laban was truly a follower of the one true God, at least not exclusively. But he was at least willing to listen when he showed up in a dream and said, don't do this. He took him seriously. In part because he'd seen, I think, because he'd seen what God had done through Jacob and how he had blessed him. He gave God credit for that. And if the God could do that, then maybe he should take him seriously when he warns them, don't do this. Yeah, we don't know what, we know what was said from God to Laban. We don't know, how many of you guys have dreams and you wake up feeling like whatever happened was real? Whether it's frightening, whether it's exciting, whether it's, scary, or, I think I've shared this from the pulpit. They talk about the fact that I get blamed for things I do in someone else's dreams. And so she says, well, you did this to me, so now I'm going to take it out on you. No, she doesn't do that, but she does joke about it. But the idea that the dreams prompt responses to us. We know what was said, but what else, what physical responses did God prompt in this dream? Was it fear? Was it the realization that who he's speaking to and who's speaking to him? So Barb's probably having a good perspective that there's more to than just verbal communication. It's not just a statement that showed up in Jacob's dream.
And how often do we read about how God speaks, the thunders and the lightnings, and it's pretty persuasive.
I think
He came to Laban, but I don't think he just was making mild spoken to him.
we probably don't read. If we go back, what did he say? Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. It probably wasn't a monotone, calm statement. How many of you as parents have made a firm statement with consequences implied without ever listing a consequence, but your child knows, if I do what mom or dad just said not to, I know what's coming. So I would say at least that kind of conversation, that there was that kind of nonverbal communication, that there is a serious warning here. And Laban, to his credit, took it seriously. Verse 30, and now you have surely gone because you greatly long for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? So, what has Laban discovered? His gods are missing. And automatically, he thinks who did it. Why would he think that? It could have been his daughters. They love me. What maybe has earned Jacob the reputation that he would be the first on the list? Deceit, trickery. He got the best of Laban this last time around. So clearly Jacob has earned some suspicion. What's that? Oh! Carl just said he got his goat. Carl sits back there, and every once in a while he just says something, and he says it just like he's a straight man. It just nothing. You need to fill in some of my lines for my sermons, Carl. Yeah. So as Carl said, Jacob got Laban's goat this last time around, and so he's figuring he's looking at Jacob and saying, well, if I was Jacob, this is what I would do. I got his goat the last time. I'm going to get everything I can and run, including the idols. Yeah, we don't know how or why, whether someone told him, whether they had a position in the house where, as he walked in, he could see them. We don't know. But clearly, they were important to him and that he paid attention to them. So they are gone. He's accusing Jacob. Here's Jacob finally gets to say something back after he's Laban shows up, unloads on him, accuses him, and threatens him. Then Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid, for I said, perhaps you would take your daughters from me by force. What does Jacob know about his father-in-law? At least 14 years. What kind of man does Jacob think Laban is? A violent man. That to get what he wanted, he would use force. He would prevent Jacob from leaving or simply keep his daughters, and we assume that the children, because he counts them in other places with his daughters. Laban has allowed Jacob to marry 2 of his daughters. Even if he just allowed him to marry 1, how many of you that have had daughters have gone through the process and said, this guy I approve of? I don't know if any of you said, no, I don't approve of this guy. But if you're willing to let a young man marry your daughter, don't you think you would have at least liked the guy? You're joining 2 families. He's going to be part of your family. How was Laban's view of Jacob? Whatever I can get from him. Free labor, free grandchildren. It's really a sad commentary on Laban about, he allowed this young man to marry one of his daughters and a second one, but we won't go there. But yet that's what he thinks of him. Jacob says, I'm afraid that you would use violence against me. Now, in my opinion, the only time a father-in-law or father should use violence against their son-in-law is if they're harming their daughter. But, that doesn't seem to be the case with Jacob. He took care of his daughters. But this is what kind of man Laban is, and Jacob recognizes that. Now, so he deals with why I left and how I left, and now he's going to deal with the idols. With whomever you find your gods, do not let him live. In the presence of your brethren, identify what I have of yours and take it with you. So what has Jacob just said about whoever stole the idols. They need to die. So what do we know Jacob doesn't know? He took him. Why do you say he doesn't know who took him? Right. Good. He assumes a man did it. And who took them? His favorite wife, right? He probably is not going to put her on the chopping block, so to speak, if he knew he was stolen. And then the next line in verse 32 is that, for Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So for once in his, well, I shouldn't say that. For one of the few times in his life, Jacob is innocent, right? He didn't deceive, he didn't do anything but take his family and start to go home. So let's see what Laban does. Verse 33, and Laban went into Jacob's tent, into Leah's tent, into the two maids' tents, but he did not find them. Then he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's tent. So he searched all these tents, hasn't found them. Now he's going to Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household idols, put them in the camel's saddle, and sat on them. And Laban searched all about the tent, but he did not find them. And she said to her father, let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise before you, for the manner of women is with me. And he searched but did not find the household idols. Now, some translations, is there anything in your translation other than being searching for the idols? Some translations talk about and communicate the idea that he searched not only with his eyes, but with his hands. He reached, he felt, he looked everywhere. What value does Laban place on these idols? A lot, yeah. A lot of value. They're his little g gods. And he has lost them. That's not much of a god if you can lose it, but that's another, that's a whole other story. But he places a lot of value on them. They're his little g gods, and he wants them back. If I don't have my God, how am I going to be blessed? How is it going to take care of me? So, we know who took them, we know where they are. How did she get away with it? Well, she lied. Yeah, she lied. Like father, like daughter, right? Like husband, like wife. She learned how to deceive, how to manipulate, how to lie from her father and from her husband. But she got away with it. Because she was sweet doing. So the picture is here that Laban is not going to find the idols. He's going to go home. Jacob's going to go to his father's. Why does God include the facts of the idols, who took them, and where they ended up? Okay, certainly it violates the Ten Commandments, which he would later give. What are Jacob and Rachel and Leah's descendants going to struggle with for their entire existence? Idolatry. And obviously, it wasn't something new. It wasn't just because they grew up next to Canaanites. The desire was there all the way back to their ancestors. I think, in part, it's a warning to Israel, clearly, but it's also a great piece of literature that God shaped this story to foreshadow what they're going to struggle with in Judges, in 1st and 2nd Kings, in Chronicles, and throughout their existence. And yet, here's a woman who wanted the idols, who desired them, rather than desiring the one true God. Then Jacob was angry and rebuked Laban, verse 36. And Jacob answered and said, what is my trespass? What is my sin that you have so hotly pursued me? So he's already saying that he's angry because he didn't do anything wrong and that he knows of. His wife did, but he did not. Although you have searched all my things, what part of your household have you found? Set it here before my brethren and your brethren, that they may judge between us both. How does Jacob respond to Laban and all that has just happened in this past few days, or a few minutes, I guess? How would you describe his attitude? Righteous indignation. He's self-righteous. For once, he didn't do anything wrong, but he's being accused of it. But he's self-righteous. He's righteous indignation because he didn't do anything. So it should end there, right? The false accusation, the pursuit, it should just stop there. But Jacob doesn't stop. Here's what he goes on to say. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried. They're young, and I have not eaten the rams of your flock. That which was torn by beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it. You required it from my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was. In the day the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. Thus I have been in your house 20 years. I have served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flocks, and you have changed my wages 10 times. Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked you last night. So what does Jacob now unload on Laban about? 20 years of pent-up what? Hey. Clearly Laban has mistreated this man. He has not treated him well. From what you know, did Jacob handle this situation well? Yeah, 20 years of pent-up frustration and anger about how he's been treated. Now, I don't know whether Jacob has addressed this or not. I don't suspect Laban would have been willing to hear it. He doesn't seem like that kind of man. But at this point, it's a little too late and probably not handled in the right way. But what, at the end of that statement, probably delivered rather loudly and rather angry, whatever, I can't say the right word. What does Jacob recognize? Yeah, unless the God of my father Abraham and the fear of Isaac has been with me. Unless he's recognizing for 20 years, in spite of all that's gone on, God has been with him and God has blessed him. Why is he recognizing that now and not at the time it happened? Yeah, Phyllis says he's still alive. That's true. I mean, he might have thought he wasn't going to come out of this confrontation alive. Or at minimum, what does he say? What did he expect of his father-in-law? Yeah. Send me away empty-handed. He would have kept the sheep, the cattle, the goats, the camels, the wives, the grandchildren, and Jacob would have gone home empty-handed. Which is more impactful to Jacob, do you think, at this moment? The fact that he's alive, or the fact that he looks like he's going to walk away with all his stuff? Mm-hmm. So if that observation that he's recognizing that God has blessed him and that God has stepped in a miraculous way, has actually registered with Jacob. How should this impact the next portion of his life, the next choices he makes? Because where is he going? Home. Who's at home? His dad, we assume, because he talks about them, but his brother, right? The one who wanted to kill him 20 years ago. And probably, like Jacob, holds a grudge. Doesn't handle things well. So if he's recognizing that God has stepped in, God has not only blessed him, but now is protecting him and his family, how should this impact his approach to the next steps of his life when he goes home? Okay, he certainly should be less fearful. He's trying to deceive and connive and manipulate and control and trust God. Because if God has done this for him, how should this truth impact you and I today? There's one thing to talk about Jacob, but now let's talk about us. Okay, God is still with us. Won't abandon us. Good. We should lessen our fear, as Vicki said. We should be thinking about the fact that, when we look at our choices, how do we respond to situations? Do we respond like Laban or like Jacob normally does? As Althea said, to manipulate, to control, to connive, to get what we want, or to do what's right and trust God with the outcome. Jacob's not innocent in all this. Please understand that. We know what he's done. But God has been gracious to him. And that should, as he's recognizing that fact, and there's been a turning point here, that should impact how he interacts with Esau when he goes home. His parents, if they're still alive. It should impact how he interacts with his wives and his children. When we see God working, when we see God doing things that we don't deserve, because Jacob didn't deserve this. When we see that, we should allow it to change how we think and how we act. We should recognize that, God blesses us, he gives us grace. Therefore, how are we going to respond to God for giving us what we don't deserve? So at this point, there's going to be, verse 43 starts a conversation with Laban, and they make a covenant and a few other things, and then they kind of separate. So we're going to stop there. It's a good point to stop, and it is 5 after 7. I haven't paid attention to the clock. Questions, thoughts, comments about Jacob and Laban? All right, well, let's close up in prayer. Father, we thank you for your continued demonstration of grace to Jacob. Lord, we thank you that you recorded not only the accounts of your grace to him, but his recognition of the fact that for 20 years you had given him what he doesn't deserve and hadn't earned. Lord, help us to recognize the things you do for us day by day, moment by moment, that we don't earn, or we cannot earn and we do not deserve. Help us not to respond like Laban and how Jacob normally responds. Help us to be shaped, impacted, changed by seeing you work in our lives in little things and big things. Help us to view the blessings that you have given us in the right way. Opportunities to thank you, to praise you, and to respond to you by blessing others, by treating them in ways they don't deserve, by showing, as we talked about this morning, our light before men, that they can see our testimony in how we act, how we react, and how we speak to them. Give us opportunities to not only do that, but talk about that. Why we wouldn't return, as Scripture says, evil for evil, but return good for evil. Because that is what you've given us, good for the evil that we've done, and the punishment we deserve you have taken away. We thank you for the opportunity to pause this week and celebrate Christmas. We know it's probably not the day that your son was actually born, but we thank you that you have allowed it to be a holiday for us to not just give gifts, but to remember who you sent, why you sent him, and what he did when he came. We thank you for this in Christ's name. Amen.